It's that time of the week again, folks. This is me, your host, Richard McCall, here in Bogota, Colombia, 2,600 meters closer to the stars. We have another author on the show. He needs no introduction to any of you, although we will introduce him. It's Matt Youkee, foreign correspondent, analyst, writer, and most recently author of 40 Days in the Jungle. We'll talk about this book, 40 Days in the Jungle. Of course, all of you, any of you, who've been watching Colombia in the last, little bit, will know about the Mucutuy children who survived an air accident in the Colombian, where the plains meet the jungles in Guaviare and that kind of area in the south of Bogota towards the Amazon. Matt has just written a book about it. It's available. I'm in the process of reading it. It's excellent so far. So Matt, welcome on the Colombia Calling podcast.
Thanks very much, Rich. Good to be back.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, last time it was many, many years ago, and you were talking about, I think, cannabis investment.
That was in, one of my business journalism ventures. Yes.
Well, there we go. And I'm sure it's still simmering away. Nothing ever really dies. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about this quite incredible story. The quite incredible story that occurred last year, if I'm not mistaken. I can't even remember.
2 years ago, 2023.
It just feels like it was yesterday. But of course, it's dropped off the headlines a bit, and there's been a Netflix series, if I'm not mistaken, as well, and so on. This is the Mucutuy children. Matt, give us a brief overview to remind the listeners what actually happened.
So 1st of May 2023, a plane takes off, a Cessna, a very small aircraft, takes off from Araraquara, a town deep in the Colombian Amazon jungle. About an hour into its flight, starts getting Mayday calls at Villavicencio, which is close to where it was heading. It was heading for San Jose de Guaviare. There are attempts to talk to the pilot, give him options of where to land. Doesn't work. The pilot tries to make an emergency landing, tries to head through a river, the Apapores in Colombia, and then crashes the plane. And then nothing's really heard for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, they're just trying to find the plane. First of all, the airline itself sets out to look for it. Then eventually the military get involved. And then there's these sort of groups of independent indigenous searchers as well, looking for this plane in the jungle. And when they find it on the 15th of May, the adults on board, the pilot, an indigenous rights activist, and Magdalena Mucutuy, a mother, found dead in the plane. But Magdalena's 4 children are missing. They're not in the plane. They find clues around the crash site, babies' bottles, diapers, this kind of stuff that give the indication these children have survived. But then it takes until the 9th of June for them to actually be found, during which time there's a ginormous manhunt or rescue operation, should say, involving the Colombian special forces, more indigenous groups. There's talk about the duende, a shape-shifting demon, being involved. There's suspicions that maybe the gorilla was somehow involved. There's also a shaman who comes in and takes Yahe, and then the children are eventually found on the 9th of June, flown out of the jungle in a Black Hawk helicopter to Villavicencio, and then taken to hospital in Bogota.
And then, of course, they were in the military hospital up on the hill there and under serious protection. No one could get access to them much as we wanted to as the press. It was a media shit show. Let's just call it what it was. It was. You were covering for The Guardian and others. I did BBC. I can't remember who else. China News, I think I did as well. Mm-hmm. I don't remember, but and then it was every documentary production company in the world was calling us all up.
Yes.
And I think we spoke to the same one. I think we spoke to one because I think they said
there was a lot. Yeah,
they were kept calling and saying, "Oh yeah, I've spoken to this guy. I've spoken to that." I said, "Well, listen, we can't get you access to the children." And they're like, "What about getting you access to the town?" I'm like, "Open your checkbook." But anyway, the story was incredible. I mean, it's that triumph, isn't it? It's the triumph of the children surviving all of those days, and the ages of the children. The oldest one's name is Leslie, if I'm not
Leslie,
mistaken.
yeah.
How old was she at the time?
She was 13.
And she was essentially, the mother to her siblings. And how young was the youngest child?
11 months at the
I
time.
mean,
Because she
it's
celebrated her first birthday in the jungle.
No, you see, with all the mod cons, I had trouble raising an 11-month-old. I've got 2 children. It's not an easy thing to do. And then in the jungle, I think the stories that came up alongside it, and as the story itself developed, there were all these different nuances. And again, you've been talking about this since you've been blue in the face. You've got the book out now. But I like the stories about the beliefs of the jungle. I like this because it's something that's otherworldly. Well, to you and I, who both from the United Kingdom, these are not things that are normal for our, let's say, cosmovision of the way the world works, and that Indigenous children, First Nations from this area, should understand this. For me, this is something reassuring. I don't know, but before I sort of wax lyrically about this, you ended up doing a lot of work on this and started. Well, I mean, you said, well, there's a book in this. There's a book in this, and let's before we get into the whole book thing. This is what I'm getting at this point is that we are from the United Kingdom. We are not from Colombia, and we are definitely not from the Amazon. You are a Northern European coming down to write a book about what, in my mind, is a truly, it's a spiritual story. There's a spiritual story, and you're coming in from a different environment. So how did you address this?
Well, yes. I mean, I was approached to write the book, I should say, and I was very keen to do it because from the very beginning, I had this sense that there was something, a deeper story to tell. Even from the very beginning, when this plane went down and nobody really understood, the names were kind of jumbled up on the register. They weren't scheduled to be flying that day. Why were they in a Cessna? Why was a private plane taking? And there was lots of rumors coming around. So it had that sort of element of mystery that sort of got my investigative juices going, should we say. But then as I came to research it, I realized that, there was going to be a lot of challenges in the reporting side, both logistical and sort of security and practically. And for a period, we did talk about working with a Widodo journalist as well to sort of do a dual book, but that didn't pan out. And then, yeah, to answer your question, it was something I didn't go down there with with a set idea in mind. I was quite open to, the interpretations of how and why these children survived. And then I probably was skeptical at the beginning. But having spoken to not just indigenous people in La Chorrera and Araraquara, where these children grew up, but also to, mestizo Colombians or white Colombians who live in these regions.
Colonos.
Yeah, the colonos, and they're people that they said, yeah, no problem. These kids, if one of these woman, Marta, she features in the book, and she has a shop where they basically run all of Araraquara society out of, like a little wooden shack where it's the shop, the internet cafe, the flight control tower, everything.
Yeah.
And she had recently adopted a small indigenous child whose both of whose parents were deceased. And she said, no, look, this kid can go off into the jungle and she will find fruits and berries and seeds. And, I tried to give her the fried, some sort of Colombian, I don't know, fried pork and potatoes or ajiaco, but she just wants to, get a mohohoi or get fruit. So it came, that's a realization I sort of slowly, probably reluctantly came to. And then, well, not reluctantly, but it was something I wasn't expecting to find. And then there was a period as well where I was in La Chorrera and I was watching indigenous women under the tree, and they were up to their elbows in a big bucket. And I looked in, it was sort of a milky, pink, purpley liquid. And I was, what's this? And they were mashing up the mil peso fruit. And I was like, what do you use this for? And they're like, well, we use this as a supplement for, baby formula for kids. And so from my perspective, I was like, okay, well, we know that the kids were found with milpeso. We know that that was one of the very few fruits which was growing in the jungle. And so it's these things started to come together. But yeah, I suppose I had to open my mind a little bit. I went to see it didn't make it into the book, but I also went to see a yahe or ayahuasca healer in close to Leticia, who gave me some diagnoses, which seemed to be pretty good. So I have lots of friends who've done ayahuasca at ceremonies and say it's benefited them. So I was open enough to try and understand this different concept of the world.
So you undertook an ayahuasca ceremony in Leticia?
I did not. You're right. I have friends. Who've taken it and have absolutely loved it. And I was open to the possibility, but I was also worried that if I took it, my vision of life and what I wanted to do with my life might alter so drastically that I might decide not to do the book. In which case, I'd have had to repay my advance and all the what I've done. So,
well, there's that, isn't there? So what I took ayahuasca a long time ago in Iquitos once, and it was actually quite fundamentally, I think, life changing in truth. So therefore, I don't ever want to do that again. I was in my 20s back then. I'm not in my 20s anymore. It is quite a powerful thing, but it was something that was on my list of things to ask you. It's like, you're getting involved in, again, the sacred side. You're tapping into something, an entirely different culture. And I know that in the now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the news reports that came out towards the end, in those final days before the children were located, the indigenous, I guess it was like different representatives from all over the country had come down, or different I know there were people from NASA people were down and so on, but who was it who obliged the military to take ayahuasca or to smoke with them in order to be able to see the jungle? I figured you'd have to go through this kind of thing.
No, I was fortunate that I didn't have to do anything to put me too much out of my constitutional comfort zone. No, there was a guy, Giovanni Yule, who's head of the Restitution de Tierras.
Okay.
And he was the one who was working closely with Petro, and he called the Minga, which was the spiritual ceremony across Colombia. So you had lots of people from all different parts of Colombia, lots of indigenous groups. It's a very diverse set of indigenous people in Colombia, and they were all performing their own ceremonies to ask the return of the children. On the ground itself, it was more. There was a particular young lieutenant amongst the soldiers, it was Lieutenant Montoya, who sort of made friends with the indigenous searchers, including Manuel Ranoque, the father of the youngest two children. And it was them working together, taking mambe, which is the ash and coca leaves, mashed together, and they sort of formed a unit there. And there was, I think one of the heartening things about the story is this coming together of the army and the indigenous groups, who were both historically very suspicious of each other. So there was a success there, both at the higher level and on the ground, that I do think is, and I mean, and the final shot, if you like, if the Black Hawk helicopter, which has traditionally been used to go after what they call them, high value targets in the guerrilla or the BACRIM, the bandas criminales, and to have that symbol of sort of military power being used to save indigenous children, I think that was a powerful image as well.
I think a lot of these things, again, that the fluidity that then occurs between the military and the indigenous search group, that was, again, as you say, not just heartwarming, it's very symbolic. And this rolls us into the history of the whole region. If we look at it, if you look at the expansion, start from the beginning in the wrong terms, the colonization of the New World, and then the expansion of colonos, and of course down south and into rubber barons and of exploitation, and then we go into latter years and the guerrilla groups and coca growing and other types of exploitation. Well, of course, the Witoto people and the other original peoples from the area are not going to have trust or any faith at all in who they see as an invading force. And as you say, this Black Hawks, which are known for strafing, I guess, the treetops are something of, abject fear for the Witoto, these military weapons of destruction. And then, of course, the relationship between the Witoto in the towns of like Araraquara and Puerto Santander on the other side, and La Chorrera. It's never been a traditionally good relationship. Right? So how was it for you going into these areas?
There's two separate ones. I went twice to La Chorrera. I really liked it.
Yeah.
To me, La Chorrera seemed like the sort of city, if you were talking about, or town, I should say, where if you were looking at, what can be achieved, that's a place where on the bank of the lagoon, you have this giant stone building. I mean, it must be the biggest stone building in the jungle, and that was the HQ of the Peruvian rubber company, which was just, about as bad an exercise in capitalist extractive policy as it's ever likely to find anywhere in the world. I mean, the way they treated local populations to, not just torture, murder, and rape, but also turning one indigenous people against another, and causing sort of multi-generational tensions that were not to the same extent as before. So you have this building there, but then I went there on a couple of occasions. There's, I think, 23 different communities. They meet in the Maloca. What I like, in the Maloca, these kids are, wearing their jeans and their sneakers, but they're still dancing to the traditional Witoto and there's numerous other tribal groups there around La Chorrera, and it's relatively harmonious. There's a feeling of protection for the culture. I also went along to there was a football tournament taking place where there was lots of there was as many girls teams as boys teams. In fact, Leslie, the main protagonist of this story, was also very sporting, and her mother too, Magdalena, had been really into sports. So I really enjoyed La Chorrera. But that was a place which was relatively free of the security issues which you confront in Araraquara. And I found Araraquara when I landed there on a cargo plane, surrounded by sort of electro-domestic items, bits of wood and cans of beer, basically, was on the plane with me. And then we arrived, and you land on a very bad runway. There's a huge military base next to you with a red radar going round and round. Marta's shop next door, which is basically where you get everything, where she will be going out in the morning with her phone to take pictures of the runway and videos of the sky, and then WhatsApping that to the pilots. And the pilots, based on her filming, are making decisions, is it okay to fly? So, and then in Araraquara, once you get out of the city and you get on a boat, which I did to go to where the kids were living, a place called Puerto Sabalo. That is not something I would recommend. It was beautiful. You go through these gorges with falls, and the jungle obviously is spectacular in that part of the country. But shortly after arriving, I was advised that people from armed groups knew that I was there and not to do anything silly. And I went upriver, I did my interviews, I spoke to people, I came back. But then, to get out of Araraquara, I was there for a week because there's only one flight a week, basically, unless I wanted to charter my own plane, which I did not have the money for. And then also in Araraquara, you see if the Casa Araña, as they call the old HQ of the Peruvian rubber company in La Chorrera, is the symbol of early 20th century capitalism and industry in the Amazon. In Araraquara, what you have is these old rundown buildings, and then these old sort of furnaces on the banks of the river, which look like old abandoned steam trains, which were used for the timber industry because from the 30s to the 70s, the Colombian government tried to create what they called the Colombian Australia in Araraquara. It was a penal colony where they sent some of their worst prisoners to essentially live in an open air prison in an attempt to civilize or bring Araraquara into the international economy. So you have at that time lots of cattle ranches, timber farms, that kind of stuff. A lot of the indigenous people were hired as guards. I went there with the father of the indigenous man who died on the plane. And he had grown up under this, and he had been basically forced to pick up a gun and be a guard to prisoners and, enter this economy. And there were some benefits because some of the benefits, one part of this was that there was educational opportunities. A lot of those early guards went on to become sort of the Colombian Amazon's earliest indigenous rights activists.
Okay.
But for a lot of people, and especially for the women in Araraquara, having all of the thousands of criminal men running around was very very dangerous for their health.
It's another world, and I mean that's a cliche. I was down in Araraquara, Puerto Santander, and we went up. We took the Caqueta River up to the Pesai and then up the Yari up into southern Chiribiquete. And this was in 2008. When we were up there, the jungles were being bombed by the government. And that's when they said for the first time that they'd killed Fabian Ramirez. And we saw the bombing taking place, and that was pretty hairy. Our boat guide, who took us up the rapids and so on, we worked out quite quickly on was a FARC guerrilla, because as we went up the river, he went, "Oh, I'd been here before. Yeah, we had Ingrid here for a few days."
Yeah.
So, all right. Okay. So with that in mind, you talked about the armed groups up at Sábalo. Is it Sábalo?
Yeah, Puerto Sábalo and around that.
And around that area. And when we did a hike up from Puerto Santander up a couple of days up into the wilds. Beautiful. But we hiked through what had previously been a camp, and quite recently. So how close did you come to this kind of danger to yourself? Because as you said, your advance did not allow for you to charter a flight out.
No, I was lucky. Again, I went with Ishmael Mendoza, who was very. He's an elder, or was previously an elder. He's very respected in the community. And that was the first thing. So we went together. He was very helpful. I had no problems with. I was advised not to do anything silly, but I had no problems. But I was lucky because I went in a period at the end of 2000. At the end of 2023, there was a ceasefire in place.
Yes.
Things weren't that bad. And now, right now, since as 2000, I was lucky that I went there in that window because things got rapidly worse. I know of people involved in this situation who subsequently went down to try and speak to similar people that I did. And one particular guy had to escape lying down in a canoe to avoid detection, then hide for, I think, 4 days in an indigenous village because he knew that there was groups out looking for him. And the EMC has taken, by all accounts, my analysis or my reading of the analysis is the EMC has used that ceasefire to rearm, strengthen, and these are the people. This is the group which is taking sort of southeastern Colombia and now moving up onto the before it was Jumbo, and now they're at the in Cali, placing bombs and killing innocents in the street. So I was lucky. My timing was good. I was well accompanied. But it's not something that I would want to have to do again tomorrow.
Yeah, well, you'll have to do the book launch down there, so we'll see. I mean,
yeah.
But it's all It's all about that. It's all about timing. It's like when we went down. I mean, it was guerrilla area, but it was all about timing and the people we were with. And one of the main sort of leaders, I guess, leaders or fixers for the Huitoto in that area, Henry Guerrero,
Yeah.
who actually I'd forgotten his name, but I stayed with his parents. So when I went and met him, I found my old photos, and he went, "Oh, that's my mum and that's my dad, and they both passed away." And then he was like, "Now I remember who you are," and all this,
Yeah.
and that opens up everything. And then I got to meet the dad of the Mucutuy children and all of the gentlemen in the hotel near to Corferias, mambiando, chewing the mambe in the hotels.
Well, you met the dad of two of the Mucutuy children.
Yeah, the youngest ones.
The youngest two.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the confusions in this whole story that I was trying to unpick as well.
And well, of course, when we were there in 2008, I mean, we were obliged to chew the mambe when we were going through the jungle. That's the driest thing I've ever tried in my life. I mean, it's just like putting fine sawdust into your mouth.
And people die because they, white guys die because they inhale and just clogs up their lungs. You have to really moisten it before you do think of breathing, basically.
It's just it could be this cloud of green. But let's go back onto this, because I mean, we've talked about this. We talked about the different levels of exploitation. Now, Roger, can we just jump in and say Roger Casement spent time in La Chorrera, where you did a lot of your research. Can you bring in some of that history just to bring it up to speed to our listeners?
So in the book, I went a little bit overboard in the research a couple of years ago, but essentially the Peruvian Amazon company had arrived in La Chorrera, established that as their base. In Brazil and Peru, which are on a more navigable stretch of the Amazon River, they had established big cities such as Manaus or Iquitos, where you did your ayahuasca. These are big, prosperous cities in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Colombia, because it has these rapids on the river, because the tributaries to the Amazon often have totally impassable rapids, the rubber industry hadn't grown so much. And then there was this Peruvian guy called Cesar Araña, who discovered, well, maybe if we there's lots of indigenous groups here. We can't navigate by the river, but maybe if we enslave them and turn them against each other and make them into indentured labor, we could eke out profit from this. And so this area was one of the worst places for the treatment of indigenous people in the service of the rubber industry. I mean, they had to not only go out and bleed the rubber trees, collect it, but then they had to haul it for miles, up and down routes past rapids to get it onto a navigable part of the river. And they hired young men as guards as well. And there was brutal reprisals for these people. And it was originally an American journalist came down and wrote about it in the early 20th century. Nobody believed him, and it was left to Roger Casement, who had just back from the Congo, I think, to go down and then bring that case. But the UK government has never officially apologized for its actions. The company was delisted from the London Stock Exchange, which was considered punishment enough. And I think that actually still rankles with a lot of people from the region.
But I think this would be quite clear generational trauma, and goes into what a lot of the indigenous cosmovision is, that the earth as well is injured from this, and I don't see why this should be a question. I can understand when your whole world is, the Pachamama, and you've been obliged to bleed it, in the word, and again, another word you used for profit from outsiders, that again, this trauma is carried. It's carried, I would almost say, genetically.
But I think my understanding, speaking with both locals and anthropologists who perhaps have a wider sort of understanding of the history of this, they have adopted some mechanisms to deal with that. They have something they call, they refer to that period as the basket of darkness. So all, and especially when the president Virgilio Barco in the 1980s returned, speaking at the Casa Araña in La Chorrera, returned a large swathe of the Amazon to indigenous ownership. They had a ceremony there as well with two baskets, the basket of darkness and the basket of light. And so putting away this negative history, both, of the rubber pit barons, and also, the period of that caused more conflict between the local groups, putting those memories and history aside, and then having the basket of life, which is all about the chagra, how to raise children, local medicines. And so this is one way of controlling that damage and, trying to build positively for the future. I mean, quite frankly, I think a lot of European countries could learn about, putting the past to one side a little bit, or at least symbolically trying to move on from the past.
Well, I mean, that's a fascinating part of the book as well, to address those baskets, and of course thinking. And I love Virgilio Barco did turn up in the headdress and everything, didn't he? But again, it's not cultural appropriation he's trying to reach across there, or maybe a bit of both. I don't know. Maybe a bit of both.
Cultural appropriation wasn't the problem back then, apparently.
No, I don't think so. But I mean, fascinating for you to be able to really, plunge yourself into this story. And I too would have gone down many, many rabbit holes on the history of the area. And I think that's why the book itself is a success, because you've got this amazing story, and the amazing story of the Mucutuy children is that of the survival, and of course the elements that have been brought in through the different segments that are reported. But you have, I don't want to say fleshed it out, because that kind of sounds negative for a university essay or something. But you have actually brought in the context of the region, which goes far beyond what else has been reported. I don't know what other documentaries are coming out, but it stays on the superficial. It doesn't talk about the history of the region. And it's a region about which we need to learn more, right? And that we need to have. And Colombia, sadly, so much of Colombian history is erased by the immediacy of the conflict. And of course, the conflict is forever present. Of course it is, and whatever. And of course, we've talked about it, the EMC, the group down there, or the Bakrim criminal gangs down there. But prior to that, there were other issues that go into the history, which make up much of why things have developed the way they have developed. And so I can only imagine truly, I would have gone, and I'll talk about myself personally here, I would have geeked out 100% and bored everyone around me with the history. Did it come to a point where everyone was like, Matt, we don't want to hear any more about this research. We've heard too much.
Yeah, actually, I don't. Yeah, that is exactly what happened. Is I had pages and pages of thick history, and then my editor, my long-suffering editor, who was very good, I was like, "You're doing flashbacks within flashbacks. This is really thick. You need to bring the characters back." And so there's a lot got left on the cutting room floor, but you have to. In order for this to be a book that's both enjoyable and informative to read, you've got to stick with that core of the story, of the children, of the family. And actually, last night I was watching on Netflix the documentary Titan, which is about the Ocean Gate disaster when it was looking for the Titanic. And of course, I went into that probably with a slight morbid fascination of what's it like down there when this thing collapsed. But quite frankly, that story is over in the first 5 minutes of the documentary, and what comes after is a very good sort of analysis of the personalities and the systematic failures which made that accident possible. And so it reminded me a little bit of my book, because there are contradicting versions of how the children survived in the jungle. I spoke to a lot of people who spoke to children at the time and after their rescue, and both in the hospital and afterwards. So I had an idea of what had happened. There were people saying one thing happened, people saying the other. So I had to basically do the most probable set of events based on all the information available. But then, I realized that let's be quite honest, for 40 days, a lot of the time the kids were hiding from the rain, waiting, not walking around. They may have had some contact with some wild animals, but it wasn't a frequent adventure. And I realized that the backstory of the family, the reasons why, the families had the economic problems they had, the reasons why people leave one area or go work in illegal mining or, have some dealings or not with illegal groups in the country, the reasons why, the runways, why are they going on Cessna? What's, why are these runways so bad? Why is there, why can they not access the crash site? And these things were much more interesting and sort of build up both the before, the during, and the and of the whole story. So that was really my interest to take the events of the 40 days, to lead with that strong throughput. So you never lose sight of the family and what's going on, but then you bring in other elements of the story around. And going back to what you initially said, yes, I had reams and reams of historical, talking about random Widodo chiefs in the early 20th century, and I realized this is losing it a bit. My editor sent me off to again read Into the Wild by John Corker, which is again something about Corker. Where somebody dies in a bus in Alaska. Nobody really knows how that happened, but by reconstructing, the story around it and reconstructing it, you can build an idea of this person. You can and have themes which run through. So hopefully that's what I achieved in the book.
Alex Supertramp.
Alex Supertramp, yes.
I read that book in 1996 when I was driving across the US. There we go.
Yeah, Jesus. Not showing your age or anything.
Not showing my age at all. I just finished high school in New Jersey and drove across the US, and that book was kind of the literary soundtrack to my journey. But I can understand that. And I'm going to watch Titan now. I'm going to watch that Netflix series because I can see the similarities in it. You've touched on a few things that we should probably talk about before the end. But there are all sorts of familial disputes with the Mucutuy family and the children, children by different parents and so on. How much is this affecting, I would ask right now, the day-to-day realities of the children? I mean, now we're looking at June 2025 because there's all sorts of issues going on, and we don't hear about it. But I know that you've really delved into it.
Yeah, I should start by saying I have to be a little bit careful.
No problem at all. That's fine.
When you and me were involved in the receiving phone calls from documentary makers and all of these things, did you find some of it a little bit unseemly?
Always. I mean, yes. It was always about getting a camera in to the hospital at any point. And I was like, no. This is why I'm not a wealthy journalist. I've got ethics.
People were probably asking you, as they were asking me, for guarantees or that they could speak to the children or this kind of stuff. And that wasn't possible. It became quite clear that these children were going to be in hospital for a long time and that there was going to be a custody dispute. The custody dispute happened before the children were out of hospital. At that time, lots of people were going around offering money for interviews, exclusive interviews, access, this kind of stuff. And that meant I had to sort of sit tight at the beginning of my research. I wouldn't say sit tight. Started doing background research, started reaching out. And my strategy was, I don't have the money to be offering, let's say, some of the closer relatives sums for exclusive interviews for my book. It doesn't exist. I managed to get most of those interviews anyway, over time. But I realized what I think very few people had realized at the time, which was that Leslie and Selene, the two oldest children, have a different father to Manuel Wanoke, who was the one who was in the news and was subsequently arrested. And I approached the family. I took my time. I just said, like, this is what I'm doing. I want to work slowly on this. This is not something that's coming out now. I don't have, the money to offer up front. I'm welcome to work in some sort of partnership as this goes forward. And so I was in contact with another gentleman called Andres Acobombaire, who is the father of these two children, the two oldest children. You'll have to explain to me, under Colombian law, if a child dies, if a parent dies, the child is automatically goes to the surviving parent. Okay, except in cases of abuse or abandonment, of which neither qualify for Andres. Andres lived in La Chorrera. He has two other children by Magdalena, which are never brought into the story. Magdalena, in 2016, around about there, left with Kristin and Leslie. Selene and Leslie. There were Selene and Leslie to Araraquara. So Andres was never abandoned his children, and yet the custody case has become very, very convoluted, and it's 2 years now. One would think that in such a high-profile case, the institutions in charge would try and make things clear and transparent and resolved as quickly as possible for the benefit of 4 children who have been unseen, both the death of their mother, spent 40 days surviving in the jungle, attacked by diseases like leishmaniasis and other things, and then subsequently have been, part of this media furore. You'd think that the institutions involved would be able to resolve the custody case in 2 years. They have not, which leads to other questions. But that is one of the strange parts of the story.
And yeah, obviously we can only get into speculation, and we prefer not to. And we'll just see how this sadly develops, because it's at the end of it's these children and their lives. And I will say this: it just sounds like there are people interested in money. That's what it sounds to me. And don't say anything. It just sounds to me this kind of thing. Now, on other things, as we wind this down, I was doing a little bit of research, and your book has been optioned. Yeah. So it's gonna be a movie.
Having just complained about people going for money, it would seem a little bit rich for me. My book has been optioned, yes. As part of the contract for that option, I insisted on certain donations to be made.
Very good, very nice.
It's been optioned by Scott Free, which is the Ridley Scott's company. I think I'm allowed to say that I've seen a first draft of the script, but there's still very many hurdles to come going forward.
Okay. Now, is the script based loosely on your book or quite accurately on your book? Is the Matt Youkee figure are you in the movie?
Well, initially somebody Initially, my agent said that she thought they would have to put me in the movie, of which I was very reluctant at first, unless it could be played by Tom Hardy. But then she said, no, it's probably more James Corden. I'm not in the movie. That's how Hollywood works. They need to, they have to get their IP. I had done the research. We're working forward on that. I have a loose association for helping with the script and some of the organization, but until that, a tiny proportion of options get made into a movie. So
yes, and now with all of this, but I was always going to ask who's going to play you as the what would I call you? Kind of like the almost just like the dialogue over the top. But okay, so Tom Hardy,
but
or
honestly,
somewhere in between you and
not.
James Corden.
But the book's not like that, and the
No,
book's not. I mean, the book when I had to originally. So one of the reasons, again, originally I tried to write myself totally out of it. There
yeah,
was not a first-person participle. There's no I or me or my in
mm.
the whole book. But the problem with that was that it became really hard to tell when
Yeah,
you were reading it who's speaking to who here. Where's this information coming from? So it had to be. So I had to change it to say, look. After
mm.
the crash, I met with person XYZ, and this is what they told me, and this is their story. Because just writing it up, sort of trying to write it factually, wasn't making any sense. So yeah, I'm in it a little bit, but it's to show how some of that research process took place. But it's more of a sort of clarifying thing. This is the journalist is not the story here at all.
Which is, I think, is the right thing. And well, congratulations, Matt. The congratulations is not an easy story to tell, not an easy story to research and get through.
Rich, could I give you one more little anecdote?
Yes, do.
So this is something I should have. When we were in La Chorrera, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is both hopefully a mildly amusing anecdote, and also shows some of the challenges these communities have. We were in La Chorrera, and I was flying. I was trying to get out there. I had to, and then just randomly, it was, there's a Cessna landing. If you have, they've got a space. Do you have some cash? You can get on board. And so I went up to the airstrip. And there's one concrete building, then 3 palm thatch huts. Yeah. Lots of people standing outside. And Cessna landed. And there was, I went to, obviously these Cessnas have a very strict weight limit and they need to be weighed. And I went and approached the lady who was organizing all of this, and their electric scales had broken. And so they were just asking people their weight. And so I know how much I weigh. And then the guy next to me, who was about a foot taller than me and built like a second row forward from a rugby team, said the same weight that I had said. And I said, there's no way that you're 75 kilos. And so, but the woman was just writing it down. Oh, he said he was 75. I'm like, no, he's not 75. And so they got this, those spring weighing machines.
Yes.
With a little hook. And so the solution was that everybody had to try and suspend themselves from this hook to weigh themselves on this. And then the pilot, and as I was doing that, I was watching, and people have weighed some of their, the cargo, because a lot of people are just sending packages, right? Just this is the only way in and out is to send it. And there was a lot of packages, and I was sitting there, and I saw an old woman run out from the trees, dump a package in the pile, and then run off again. And I was just like, this can't be the only way in and out of this. And then the pilot arrived, and he spoke very good English, actually. And he sat down, and he brought himself his own pair of electric scales. So he weighed everything up. Everybody got on the scales, added it up, we weighed all the cargo, and he basically eliminated about a quarter or a third of the cargo that had been all cleared to go on the plane. But when you understand, I mean, it's kind of amusing. I mean, I sat up front with him in the plane on the way back. It was the same model of Cessna as the one that crashed. And, the life of these pilots is so different to the life of a commercial airliner. And they are under pressure, and they're being offered money by the narcos to fly planes to Suriname. They're on a roster under pressure to, make these flight deadlines and make these routes. They're very small companies. You'll see that the same company, Avian Line, is associated with a crash that happened last week in Colombia. And so this is an example of state abandonment, right? This is an example of, this is the only way in and out for these people. They don't have much financial possibility. And so people are trying to, sneak a parcel on, and, nobody's there to oversee how these things get weighed and dealt with. And, this is the sort of lack of support for the aviation industry, I suppose, in this particular case, which leads to this kind of disaster. So anyway, that was something that happened to me while I was on my trip. I had to dangle off a hook to weigh myself.
Is it like a cow carcass being weighed at an abattoir?
Yeah.
I can just picture it, and I can imagine the noise around people trying to get their parcels on the plane.
Yeah.
You know, just the absolute chaos of trying to do this, and I can picture it, having been to these areas, not flown in that Cessna, thank God.
But it comes down to the person. It comes down to the personality of the pilot. That is the point of failure. The guy I was with was strong enough to say, no, that is not going on there, and that is not going on there. But in other, people with a different personality, or if the people demanding their items go on had been, more forceful, then we could have ended up with an overloaded Cessna on the way back, flying the same route pretty much before.
Are these Cessnas with fixed wheels?
Yes.
So entirely a death trap for any crash, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's some examples of how people have landed them relatively. So there's all things about trying to do a treetop landing or a river landing, but it's because this is
whoever it was is the grandson or the great nephew of the Kennedy that was flying a fixed wheel over and died off Cape Cod or somewhere. He's like, and my godfather was a pilot in the Korean War, and it was just like, you never fly fixed wheel over the water. that was like, his immediate reaction. It was like,
I mean, but these pilots have. I mean, it's just incredible to me the way they make. They have to. It's down to their personal, experience and professionalism whether these things go up in the air or not.
I have a question around this. How does a pilot become a pilot in this area? I mean, I get this. I'm getting this image of if you think about a Hollywood movie, it's sort of like the Air America or something, where it's the drunken cast-offs who are no longer available for,
I'm not sure that's an accurate. I'm not sure that's.
I don't think so either.
But they are these Cessna pilots. It's there is a sort of esprit de corps amongst them. They're very proud. It's like a Harley Davidson rider, right? Nobody who's overly concerned about their safety and security rides a Harley Davidson around all the time. But there's a certain pride in doing these difficult jobs, and these are the things that keep, Colombia's. These are the people who keep Colombia's remote regions connected to the center. It's a very important job. Obviously, one of the slight inspirations, I have a chapter on the pilots, and one of the inspirations is Herman Castro Caicedo. He has a book about pilots in the Llanos, flying the big planes, and an insane amount of them have died. Yes. And they don't get paid very well, and they're always being offered, better opportunities with drug laws, but most of them do it because they see themselves as a crucial cog, in the same way that we during COVID would see nurses as being, or NHS staff as being crucial. These guys are the same thing, and they're kind of macho about it. And sometimes they're, they do. Some of them might enjoy a drink or two, but there's a certain pride in the job that they do, and so I think that was what I found from them. Unfortunately, there's a roster, and people move up and down the roster. And if you don't, and if you're at the top of the roster and you're experienced and well respected, you can say, and your boss tells you to fly a route, and you look at the sky and it's absolutely, heaving down. You can say no, and your boss can't do much to you because he needs good pilots like you. But if you're lower down the roster and your boss says fly, and you say I don't feel like it, then you're going to have, you don't know when you're going to get the next flight. So that's one of the sort of structural issues there.
Wow. Will you be doing any readings, launch events or anything that we can send our listeners to anywhere in the world?
I'm doing an event with Fame. I'm doing a couple of online events with some other people who've written books about jungles recently.
So. Okay, so please send us all the links to share. And congratulations on this. 40 Days in the Jungle. No small feat to have written this book. And the reviews are incredibly high praise, and that's as they should be. Please, everyone, buy the book, support writers, support indie journalists, support people out there doing interesting things and telling stories that need to be told. Matt, thank you so much for your time and talking about this and going off on tangents, of which I love. I love tangents and anecdotes. So it's
Yeah, Colombia tangents calling. No, but it's good, and I really appreciate it. Again, this has been a fun conversation because I feel with the Colombia calling audience, I don't have to go over the bare bones of where Colombia is and this kind of stuff. So I appreciate it being able to go off into different areas.
Yeah, you're allowed to talk a bit further and bit more in depth in some of the issues here, rather than just the story. I say just the story, but the incredible story of the Mucutuy children. But I think it as in your book, it feathers into something greater and far meatier. And so congratulations on that. We'll put this up all over social media and so on and so forth. I can't promise you 1 billion sales, and I can't promise you anything, but I know that some will buy it, and it's been a fun conversation, and best of luck in this next chapter, because I know you've got all sorts of things ahead. I won't obviously publicize them here, but anyone who follows you, and of course you're writing on Substack and you're in The Economist and elsewhere, just keep up to date. Matt's always doing interesting stuff.
Thanks, Rich.
You're most welcome. This has been the Colombia Calling podcast. Buy the book, 40 Days in the Jungle, available everywhere by Matt Youkee. Matt's been based down here in Colombia and Panama for a long time and knows his stuff. So, of course, highly recommended. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.